some foolish people out here who look at their personal relations with white folk, and they have good white friends. And I'm not doubting the sincerity of the friendship. Not at all. Not at all. I do not doubt that blacks and whites can be truly friendly, and we should be friendly as people. And I don't see any problem with having those friends, you know. But do not confuse your personal relations with the relations between groups. Do not always assume that the dynamics that determine your personal relationships are the same dynamics that can be used between groups. That's a serious error that a lot of people make.
I live by the code, that's my eye. Whipping vegan food up in my pot. Why they claim I acted so unruly? Cause I'm listening to while it moving Rudy.
Peace, everyone. I'm Geechie Motivator, and I'm here with one of my favorite living leaders right now. I'm gonna let my brother introduce himself, and then we're gonna get right into the conversation.
Peace, brother Geechie Motivator. How you doing today? Blessing to being here. I'm Baba Imhotep. I see 520 founder of PLM. I don't like to get into titles, but just know that I'm 1000% committed to the assignment to the African people. And I like to define myself as being a cold-blooded Pan-Africanist. I'm one of those Pan-Africanists who only want Africa. I'm not one of those Pan-Africanists that's trying to squeeze a little bit of white up in there and trying to, no, I don't want no other body's stuff. You know, I'm a cold-blooded Pan-Africanist.
Love it, love it. So today we're talking about violence, and we're gonna probably get all over the place in terms of violence and what it is, how it is, all those things. My first question would be, from your understanding, your study, your experience, what would you say is the root of violence? Like what causes violence? What's the root of it, especially as it pertains to us in America?
That's a great question, because the way that I'm going to answer it, it's going to require for a person to put some thought into it. So let me do this first to answer that question. So violence is what we can define as being unprovoked aggression. Unprovoked aggression that inflicts harm, pain, or injury upon another person or a group of people. So the root to that is insecurity, greed, and selfishness. That's the root cause to that there. When you have insecure people, greedy people, and selfish people, they are inclined to transgress against another or another group of people. The end result being injury, hurt, maim, or murder. So that's what violence is. Oftentimes we tend to define violence as a person's ability to defend themselves. Self-defense against unprovoked aggression is not violence. That's logical. That's a logical response. That's not violence. Violence is that which is unprovoked. It comes from a selfish place. It comes from a very greedy place, and it comes from a very insecure place. So I would define it as such.
Would you say that, and I know you kind of touched on it, would you say there's a necessary violence, or is that the defense that we're trying to call violence?
Yes. So what becomes a necessary violence, because we are using a language that's not ours. So since we are using a language that's not ours, we can tend to become very conceptual with the words. So necessary violence becomes the logical response to the violence that have been unleashed upon us. So there is a point in time when we must respond in kind to what's happening to us.
All right, the next question is kind of like, I guess it's still in alignment with that question. So you think about a reaction, you think about prevention, and then obviously a reaction and response is kind of the same thing. But like, what's your philosophy on violence and confrontation? Like, When you explain it to our people, or just explain in general, what's your philosophy around violence, confrontation? You can go into the necessary, when it's necessary, things like that.
So let's start like this. The first thing that we have to understand is that violence of any kind is a behavioral. Violence of any kind is a behavior. Confrontation of any kind occurs logically and naturally within nature. Oftentimes, people have not been developed enough to know how to respond to confrontation and how to navigate confrontation. So people tend to want to stay away from confrontation as if confrontation is a bad thing. So confrontation in general is not necessarily bad. Now, transgression and aggression, assault, in terms of confrontation and conflict, those things are what we can define as being negative energy being impacted upon another person or people. When that happens, then the logical response is for the recipient of the violence. The recipient must respond in such a way that prevents or ward off the violence that's being unleashed upon him or her. Now, if you have to annihilate the perpetrator to preserve your life, then that's what you have to do. You cannot say, well, I'm not going to annihilate this perpetrator that's clearly intent on taking my life. You can't get around that. So some confrontations we have to engage in, because confrontation isn't necessarily bad in the absolute sense. Some confrontations are necessary for further development, for further clarity. We have to engage in some degree of confrontation.
Love it. So before I get into the next question, oftentimes we pit the leaders based off of what probably was force-fed to us. Could you briefly explain, what do you think people's misunderstanding about Malcolm X's nonviolent movement? Do you think there's been some misunderstanding about what that actually meant? Or
Malcolm X,
Martin Luther King. I'm sorry, Martin Luther King. I'm mixing them already.
Yeah,
yeah, Martin Luther King.
I believe Martin Luther King had been greatly misunderstood. And I believe his misunderstanding stems from the fact that what we tend to do is we intend to project how we think today onto what was happening 60 and 70 years ago without having context. So granted, Martin Luther King, he read some of Mahatma Gandhi's works and attempted to apply some of what he thought Gandhi did in India, and he was trying to apply it here. Excuse me. But what I would say is this. King had courage. It takes courage to do what King did. So King never ran from the confrontation that got in front of him. He never ran, he never retreated. He just said that initially, anyway, he said, we will not respond back the way that they are acting towards us. That's what he initially said. But King also had enough sense to know that he needed to have a firearm. He knew he needed to register to get him a firearm. Ralph Abernathy carried a firearm. Many individuals amongst King carried firearms because they understood that although this is our initial strategy, there may come a point in time when this strategy will have to shift. And if we have to shift in strategy, it's best that we be prepared than not to be prepared. So I think King is misunderstood because the terminology is used nonviolence. So nonviolence for King was more so about him trying to teach the perpetrators some type of morality. So if I can take my Christian perspective and project it onto others by me being subjected to suffering, then maybe that may grow a conscience in them and in turn make them change their behaviors. That's what King was trying to do. It was strategy. It wasn't his overall thinking. like any leader, you start off with different strategies and you shift. Right? It always happens. You know, if you take a person that's been doing this work for a very long time, their strategies shift over time. So you cannot judge a person by a part of their development. You have to judge a person by the total evolution of that person. Because if you see King from the beginning to the end, you see how King began to make his shift. If King was nonviolent in the sense that we think about it as being a weakling, he never would have moved his family into the projects in Chicago. He moved into the projects. If he was a coward, he would have stayed out. He said, in order to be effective, I must go where my people are. He moved into the projects. So he wasn't a coward in the sense that we think of him being a coward in. He just had a misconception of his initial strategy. Simple as that.
Right. So before we get to the next one, I want you to respond to this. And so for the people watching on YouTube or Facebook, comment questions, be a part of the conversation, but also make sure you share it. And I'm going to shift gears in a second with another question, but what do you think about this response? We obviously know when people have movements, and I love what you say, and a lot of people say that all the great leaders you can think of was a part of an organization, right? And sometimes when different leaders come to an organization, they kind of shift people's direction and consciousness. Do you think Bayard Rustin imposed that philosophy on him? How you feel about that?
I think I'll say this because I understand Bayard Rustin's influence and his overall thinking, but I won't necessarily say it was a total imposition because I've studied enough of Dr. Martin Luther King in his initial years to know that he was already teetering along the lines. But I do believe that if Bayard Rustin was not involved, and King was allowed to do his own thing his own way, I don't think King would have took that. I don't think King would have took that particular path. I believe because initially King did not want. He didn't even want the front line. He didn't want none of that. He rejected the whole idea, the whole concept. But what King had the charisma. You know, he had the youth. So he was set up in terms of being put in a position to move a body of people a particular way. He was naive, no doubt, because he started out very young. Because when he died, he was 39. Right. So you think about when he started, he was in his early 20s. He was a young person. So he had levels of naivete. And the older people who was already, quote unquote, in what we would define as being the civil rights movement. Because if you talk about civil rights, you got to go back to the 1600s if you want to talk about civil rights. We can't talk about 1955 and say that's civil rights. You know what I'm saying? What they was doing the entire time they've been in this land was civil rights, if you want to use that terminology. So for those individuals during that time period, the 1940s up to 1955, those individuals who was already out there, they were able to influence Dr. King to move him in the direction that he probably would not have went in if he'd have been allowed to his own vices in development. That's what I believe. So yes, I would have to agree that the Bayard Rustin was highly influential and hijacking Dr. King's thought process and moving him in the direction that he went in.
Okay. So this next question, it might cause a knee-jerk reaction to certain people based on how they feel. And later on, we're going to get into like your idea of different types of violence. But would you conclude that American capitalism success or American capitalist success is some kind of form of violence, whether it be economic or cultural? Go ahead.
Oh man, whoa, woo. And it's interesting because you know, most people would not even conceive of it as such, but capitalism is inherently violent. There is no capitalism. There is no nice, peace, humane capitalism. It doesn't exist. Capitalism is predicated upon dog eat dog. It's vampirish. It's leech. What does a leech do? A leech suck on something. It sucks the life out of something. What does a vampire do? A vampire sucks the life out of something, right? There is no humane capitalism. Capitalism is inherently violent on all levels. It fosters violence and it feeds violence. Capitalism is economic violence. Capitalism is political violence. Capitalism is poverty, and poverty is violent. Capitalism is social violence. Capitalism is medical violence. There's nowhere around.
Why do you think, again, I know we only know probably one violence and everybody can regurgitate, but why do you think like that's such a hard concept for people to like accept or deal with?
Say that, ask the question again, please.
Like why do you think that's such a hard concept for people to accept or deal with? Like that economic practice is parasitic, inherently violent. Why do you think that's something hard for people to like come to terms with?
Oh, it's hard to grasp by many individuals because there's a narrative surrounding it. So capitalism isn't a single thing, right? Capitalism is a total system. So capitalism, which we understand economically, is also locked into media. Capitalism, which is economics, ties into education. Capitalism ties into medical. So it's not single. So since it's not singular, it's a total system. What it have done, it have built their mechanisms to make it appear to be something good. So by appearance, people can't see the reality of what it is. So the appearance is this: go to school, get a good education, you can become a millionaire. So why would I think something like that is bad? Why would I look on TV and I see Michael Jordan or LeBron James, or I see Snoop Doggy Dogg who say, well, I used to be a Crip and now I'm doing all this over here and I can hang out with Mark the store and sell my marijuana? Why would I think capitalism is bad when it allows stuff like that to occur? That's what we can't get. We cannot make the two. We can't make the understanding. We can't put that together because we see people who we deem as being successful, and because we deem success as being materialistic, it's hard to grasp how capitalism is negative and violent, right? So what has to happen is it has to be a real education around what capitalism is, what it isn't, what it does, and who truly benefit from it. That's what has to occur, right? So I tell people all the time, look how many millionaires we have that are black. But look at the state of Black America, right? We got what? A few black billionaires, right? Look at the state of Black America. So we have to understand that what individuals are allowed to have is no true indication of how far the group have moved. Now, on the flip side, what little they give to our individuals in turn moves their whole group. That's the inverse. They give a few of us a little something and a few of us move forward, but that moved their whole group. But a few of us get something and it doesn't move our whole group.
Right. I love it. So you talked about a little bit of education. If you can go into detail or you can give us a snapshot. When you think about training and overthrowing our condition, like what is it going to take for us to overthrow this reality, this environment, this condition? Like what kind of training, what kind of education, whatever? What do you think it's going to take?
I'm gonna quote Dr. Clark. I like Dr. Clark. He made a very profound statement that I think is highly overlooked. I don't hear anyone. People do a lot of quoting, but I never heard people make this quote right here. What he said is this. He said, until we produce a generation that's willing to sacrifice, we will remain in the conditions that we are in. We're just not serious enough, Bubba Line. To be honest, we're not serious enough.
Right.
We're not serious enough as a people. A lot of us still want what they have. You know, a lot of us want in, but we don't know how to kind of say that. A lot of us want their validation. We want their acceptance. We want to be in the spaces where they are at. You know, it's a lot of confusion through the ranks. So what I would say is this: the type of education that we need. And I like to not even use the word education. Let's get down to real business, right? What education is essentially is socialization. So we need a socialization system process that orientates us, man, woman, and child, to strive, endeavor, and push for African sovereignty 24/7. We need to be socialized for power. Think about this during the Vietnam War, because the French were there first before the U.S. got involved. It was the French, right? But so that's, you're talking about over a time period. So what the Vietnamese people began to do is they began to involve the total society in their struggle. Children, women, and men. Everybody was tied into that society. And they understood that no individual life was greater than the total life of the Vietnamese people. We're going to do whatever we got to do, however we have to do it, to ensure that Vietnam is free of these European invaders. We have yet to produce the type of people who think like that. We still saying stuff like this. Man, Baba Imhotep, he too serious. We still talk like that. How can you get free when you have people who think that if you want freedom 24/7, you too serious? How can you get free? How can you get free when you got people who cannot process that we are under perpetual attack? Why? How can you get free when you got people who still say, well, I'm going on vacation? Ain't no damn vacation in war.
Right.
Ain't no damn vacation in war. Now, I understand self-care. I know you need your time, right? Reframe the damn concept. But stop saying you need to go on vacation. We in wartime.
Right.
Yeah, you need to go. You need to go get some rest. I heard that, because everybody need rest, right? But let's start changing the language that we use, because language impacts thought, and thought influences behavior. We got to change the language.
So, Sister Shauna bring up this rites of passage, and I was literally in the barbershop arguing my ass off just now. I'll tell you what I argued about later. But so sometimes it's this expectation that, oh, people just need to do this, right? And we know for a fact that they didn't go through a rites of passage. And so, what are your thoughts about having grace with people who obviously didn't go through rites of passage? But then, how do we actually begin to because I think rites of passage is socialization and evoking commitment to an agenda, right? And if you don't go through an intentional one, then you're going through some kind of rites of passage, or you're going through some kind of socialization. So, again, how do you respond to people who are highly critical of people who haven't been through that? And how do we begin to push people into this being developed intentionally for African sovereignty?
Oh man. So let me speak to the rites of passage piece first and foremost. I understand and know the importance and the power in our traditions and in our traditional ways. And I believe that rite of passage most definitely has its value. And people should, if they could, they should go through rites of passage. But what a lot of people don't know is this. Let me say this, right? Because I never talk about my history, right? So let me do this first to answer the question. So for those who don't know, I am 49 years of age. A lot of people don't know that. I'm 49. So I've been doing this work since 1993. So that's when I started. I started in 1993, and I started doing this work with people who you would define as being hardcore criminals, because I started doing this work in prison. So I've been doing it in prison, and I've been home from prison. And so I've been home from prison since 2004. And then doing this work across the board and meeting so many different types of people, what I've come to realize is that the European training has penetrated so deep into the psyche of African people. If people are not engaged in some serious soul searching and doing some radical transformation of their own consciousness, we don't get out this mess, you know. So rites of passage for me, in order for it to be effective, because I've met a lot of people who've had a rites of passage, and these people are no good. They some low down, bad, dirty people, right? I've met them. I've met some people who have been through rites of passage who are supreme, excellent, right? What I realize is this: like in any situation, the institution is only as good as its facilitators. It's only as good as the individuals that's facilitating the systems and the processes that the institution houses. Because in essence, the institution are the people. The same as the culture. The culture is the people. That's the reason why the culture go where we go. That's the same with the institution. So anybody can set up a rites of passage, but like Sister Shauna just said, we got a qualifying question who's doing it. I do agree with my sister. So it's the people or the person that's instituting and facilitating the processes of the rite of passage. When those people are in fact living what they talk about and demonstrate what they talk about, then they in turn can impact and effect productive people on the outside. I say it all the time. Ask every leader or every person that professes to be a leader should send you to his or her fruits. Where are the fruits that you bear? How long have you been a leader? 10 years, 15 years? Then show me 5 fruit then. I don't need to talk to you. Let me go talk to your fruit, because your fruit will validate who you are. Right? So that's what I say. It's about the person. So that the people are the institution. The people are the rites of passage. We just bring other people into it, and then what we do, we transmit to them, and in turn, we touch their essence. Once we touch their essence, we bring out the best in them, and they do the rest of the work. They do the rest of the work on their own. So I'm not too hard on anybody, right? The only ones I'm hard on are blatant hypocrites. If you're a blatant hypocrite, I'm hard on you. I'm not hard on anybody that's trying to come into this process and you're trying to find your way, you know, and you a little confused here, a little confused there. That's okay, because there's no such thing as enlightenment without confusion. There is no way to enlightenment without going through confusion. So anybody who frowns on a person that's confused is a fool, because you must travel through confusion to arrive at enlightenment.
Right.
I'm not critical of those types of people. I'm critical of hypocrites. I'm critical of fakes and phonies, because I can't stand those types of individuals. Those are the ones that I'm critical of.
Right. So I love you just prefaced my next question, and I know you can go in on BLM, Black Lives Matter movement, and that's ideology, but what they paint, especially based off of propaganda, is this illusion and this delusion of racial harmony, right? Especially for the people coming in, right? And they, you know, a lot of times when you learn something, you kind of look for the first thing that you already knew that sound like it, and like, yeah, this is what we're talking about. But what do you say to people who are falling for the illusion of racial harmony, especially the people who are just coming in? And then speak a little bit about the need for confrontation. Is it kind of evident? I'm sorry, evident, inevitable. Is it inevitable that we gonna have to deal with confrontation and not so much fall into this delusion of racial harmony?
So I'm gonna answer that by paraphrase Dr. Bobby E. Wright. And what he said is this: he made a very valid point. He said revolution is when institutions are in conflict. He said revolution is when institutions are in conflict. So the first thing I would say is this: we are not living in some time period of racial harmony. We have never lived in a time period of racial harmony. Like I said earlier on, people carry and transmit their cultures wherever they go. Historically, Europeans have been violent. There's nothing in a history that can ever show you or indicate any type of peace. Nowhere in a history. All you got to do is go through any history book. You can go through the ones that they jacked up, right? Because they don't hide their violence, they glorify their violence. You know what I'm saying? So there's nothing peaceful about Europeans, white people, first and foremost. And that's a fact. So we're not in peaceful time periods. The institutions that white people have enacted historically and contemporaneously have been violent towards African people. The social work system have ripped the black families apart. That's violence. The educational systems have destroyed the minds of African people. Not all of us, but a great deal. That's violence. The hospitals have experimented on black people forever, right? That's violence. I'll give you an example. When I was 13, 12 or 13, I was in a lot of situations with the juvenile court system. And it was one juvenile judge, her name was Judge Cochelle, white lady. You know, and she told me, you know, she said that I don't understand how a 12-year-old boy can just be in the type of trouble that you are in. Clearly, there must be something wrong with your brain. You must be incapable of learning. And she ordered me at 12 or 13 to have my brain checked out at Johns Hopkins Hospital. This is like 1983, 84. So I goes over there, they put me inside an MRI, right? It just so happened that I was too young to even begin to process what they was doing to me, right? But that's violent, right? So the point is this, right? There's not racial harmony. You know what I'm saying? All of their institutions have dealt violently with us and are violent towards us. We delude ourselves into believing that we are harmonious. That's our own delusion. That's our own sickness. That's a result of our myopic effect. So that's a word that I like to use because I think we should go in and throw the word trauma out the window. You know, I'm not saying that people don't have those issues, but I'm saying we should just go and give a new word to it. Let's call it you either myopatized rather than being traumatized. You myopatized. You know, and the effects of myopia is myopic. You know, so that's what it is. Like the myopic effects. We all are feeling that. You know, whether we being shot down by the police, whether you get hired, then you get fired, whether it's a woman working with white men that's sexually harassing her, whether it's a deluded black person that have become an administrator of white patriarchy, because in that instance you are white, whether it's a black police that's pulling the trigger, assassinating another black person, in that instance you are an instrument of white terrorism, so therefore you are white. So we're going to define you by what you do, right? So my point is, like, we're not living in racial harmony. We're living in violent times. The USA have always been violent, have always been hostile, and have always been volatile. And that's where we are at today.
Okay. So I want you to get into some type of violence that we can identify, and then tell me if you think that one is more severe or damaging than the others, or the other types of violence, and which one you think is like the most severe form.
So I'm gonna take a page out of some of our historical brothers' book, and consider the fact that I've been working officially with quote unquote street violence since 2008. And considering the fact that I spent 13 years and 9 months in prison where I was dealing with multiple levels of violence and I've been a recipient of violence, what I would say is this, right? When we think of violence, as for African people, the greatest form of violence that I would have to speak to at this point is any violence that injures the spirit of a people, right? So for me, that violence would be the perpetual onslaught of white aggression in all forms. Because what I would like for us to do is to see white aggression as a total system that may be instituted through different faculties, but it's a total system. So I believe that the ongoing onslaught of white aggression have done something very injurious to the spirit of black people. And I think when you do that, when you damage the spirit, right, you essentially have damaged the entire person. That's the reason why we on drugs today. That's the reason why our uncle will touch his niece. That's the reason why, you see what I'm saying, we got adult men chasing young women. That's the reason why we got all these older women chasing these younger boys. That's the reason why we got the sexual molestation and all that stuff taking place. Because the spirits of us have been tainted. Our spirits have been tainted in such a way that we are now walking around with a blight on our spirit. And the longer we carry that blight, the further we erode in conscience. Our conscience begins to erode to such a degree that we are no longer operating with a conscience.
Mm. So one of the comments triggered my myopic reaction for the discussion earlier I had at the barbershop. And I want you to respond to this. So, especially with the capitalism thing and any other vehicle or creation that Urugu have with the Utah Mawaho, when you have this ideology of, well, it's the game, let's just play it, like, let's make it work for us. What's your thoughts about that, and do it make it less violent if we are manipulating for our benefit?
Oh man, I think all that's delusional. I think that's our way of just trying to soften and relieve ourselves of the responsibilities. Because it's like this. If you and I are standing on the corner together hanging out, and I notice that someone is trying to take advantage of you, but they're doing it in a very indiscreet way, and I try to make you aware of that, now you may be aware of it, but if you acknowledge it, then you have to respond to it. Sometimes to prevent from responding to it, we act like we don't acknowledge it. And I think that's what we are attempting to do when we talk about, yeah, you got to play this, you got to do that. We're trying to figure out ways not to actually have to deal with what's happening to us. So that's why we talk that way. We stand a better chance at seeing this thing for what it truly is, and putting all our energy and all our focus into doing for ourselves. We stand a better chance of doing it that way rather than always saying, well, let's milk it for we can milk it for, let's do this, let's do this. Let's just try to leave some of that mentality where it's at and develop a more righteous mindset. When I say righteous, I'm not talking about anything religious. When I say righteous, I'm talking a more righteous mindset in the sense that we are more focused on our own sovereignty. You know what I'm saying? More committed to our own sovereignty. We're more innovative and more creative about how we are going to move towards sovereignty for ourselves. That's what we should take, whatever skill sets that we have, and we should develop our own models, right? Throw our words out. All these words, as much as we can throw their words out, throw them out. If we're not going to go back and get indigenous African terminologies, then let's be what? Let's be innovative and create our own. So that's why I wear this shirt right here, urban philosophy, because no one can say they did that. That's me. You know what I'm saying? The definition, the books, it's me. At one day in history, you will see a whole school of urban philosophy, right? Because my philosophy is not predicated on Aristotle, Plato, or none of them, Pythagoras, or none of them. When I talk about is African deep thought, it comes from the ancestors. So that's why I say throw trauma out the window. I'm not saying that we haven't sustained some damage. Yes, we have. But let's redefine it for ourselves. Let's create our own conferences. Let's bring our own people together. Let's stop even going to their stuff, because we're going to their stuff trying to convince them of what we know about us. For 10 years, I worked amongst these people. I kept on telling them, like, man, listen, you can't talk about children in the hood and leave out culture. Nah, man, we got to focus on trauma-informed care. I kept on saying, hold on there, listen, that's some white stuff, right? So now within the last 3 years, the last 4 years, now they talk about healing center, right? So now when you get to the healing center approach, now they want to bring in culture. Granted, it was a black person who pushed it through, right? But I'm saying it's been there. We've been understood this, but I think we misused our times because we get the PhDs, we get the masters, we waste our time trying to convince white people, trying to convince them to allow us in, rather than going and build and do for ourselves. Create your own terminologies, because you don't need to have their authority on anything. Create our own book. The diseases that they use for us, that's not even our stuff. We got some other stuff that's going on that needs to be diagnosed and worked out. But where are our books at for that, right? So my thing is this, right? Create our own across the board. Call these people who they are, see them from who they are, and focus on our own sovereignty.
Love it. So, in light of the urban philosophy, would you agree with Elias in terms of the psychic trauma is the worst form of violence? It's harder to see and heal those wounds. So, would it be psychological violence is the highest one, or do you have another one?
So I'll say, I like his answer. I wouldn't necessarily say I disagree with that. But like I say, the way I'm looking at it from is like I would say they kind of similar. I'm more so speaking to the spirit of a person. That a psyche, the psyche isn't necessarily what we define as being psychological, right? So the psyche is more in alignment with what I mean when I say spirit. When you think about from our ancestral point of view, we broke the psyche down. The psyche, what they define as being the seat of the soul. So our psyche was broken down, was breaking down into multiple layers, right? So when I'm saying spirit, it is synonymous with the psyche because that's what has been damaged inside of us. So it take a damaged spirit to rape your daughter. It take a damaged spirit to molest your niece. It take a damaged spirit for a father to, you know what I'm saying, to sexually harass his daughter. It take a damaged spirit for a mother, you know what I'm saying, to deal with her sons in such a way that crosses the boundary. That's a damaged spirit. That's not necessarily being misdirected, right? Because as spirit people, as child-centered people, as life-affirming people, we knew instinctively not to do those things before we came amongst these Europeans. Now our instinct is gone, and we'll do it. That's because the spirit is damaged. And that's the reason why I always say we are beyond mental health. We are more so at the place of spiritual health. And people try to say, but the mental and the spirit is the same. The mental and the spirit are not the same. The mental refers to the faculties of the mind, logic, reasoning, cognition, intellect. Spirit predates those. Spirit predates them. And spirit is the essence that allows the mind to be.
See, I had a comment coming in. Okay. Said yes, you're agreeing. So as we're wrapping up, we have about a few more questions. Anybody who have a question, make sure you comment in any comment section on YouTube or Facebook and share it with some people who need to be a part of this conversation. Bob will always deliver the chill bumps raising content. So I want to ask you this: in terms of achieving achieving balance, getting back to that center, and you kind of mentioned it, but I want to kind of go in a little bit more. What do you see or think will get us there, and what shall be our intentions? Right. So I know that people are doing things and believing things, but like, what are some of our intentions should be? Like, what should we intend to do? Our a silly, if you want to call it the root, what should our intentions be in getting back to balance?
So let's say this right here. So I like that the people talk about Maya, and I believe that there should be greater understanding surrounding Maya. So I'm gonna talk about it like this right here. When you think about Maya, you got to think about four things first and foremost. So let's think about Kemet, because you know Maya come to us in its most developed form in Kemet. So you got the Neswoot Biddy. Some call him a king, some call him a pharaoh. So I'm just using the language to meet the people. So I say Neswoot Biddy. So his principal task was to maintain Ma'at on earth. To maintain and represent Ma'at on earth. Ma'at is order in one sense. So we got a social order, there's a natural order, a cosmic order, and there's a spiritual order. Whenever one of those orders are placed in disorder, it's the responsibility of the practitioner of Ma'at to restore the order. So in order for us to truly have a Ma'at society, Europeans, because the Europeans have created disharmony. disorder on the social level, disorder on the natural level, disorder on the cosmic level, and they have disorientated our spirits. So as long as we're around white people, we are in a living state of disorder. So to have Mayat, we would have to restore the order. And part of restoring the order is to deal with the practitioners of the disorder. See, Mayat is both might and right. Mayat is not what we define as being this passive peace. Like, we tend to think of Mayat from a Judo-Christian perspective. We think Mayat is this submissive, passive type of peace. That's what we think it is. So we talk about you gotta be ordered, you gotta have balance, but we think that doesn't involve any type of contention. Why do you think Haru and Set was in contention? Why do you think the whole story was surrounded around those two? Because it was letting you know that both of them represented might and right, right? Justice. One of the principles of Maya is justice. Justice is two things. Justice, not only justice is a reward, but it's a punishment as well. If you rape my daughter, the justice is to remove your head. That's justice. Simple as that. You gotta go, buddy.
Right.
That's justice. You gotta go. Right? So to bring back Mahat in the truest sense, we would have to deal with the practitioners of disorder. Right? Now, for general conversation, to get to Mayat, we have to reorientate our thinking. We have to think like African people. We cannot think like white people and use African concepts. That's a mistake. So we got to understand what it means. So let's talk about reciprocity. So reciprocity, right? You want to be Mayatic, reciprocity. Your brother look out for you, you look out for your brother. Your brother speak to you, you speak to your brother. Your brother there for you, you there for your brother, right? It don't have to be in kind. But if your brother do for you, then you do for another brother. That's reciprocity. If you help me, Lord, and you may not necessarily need any help the next day or the day after. But if another brother needs some help because you helped me, now I help him. That's reciprocity, right? Now, propriety is one of the principles of Mayat as well. That's proper conduct, proper behavior. You do not hit your wife. Don't hit your wife. That's in the Hosea. That's in the book of Imhotep. It says something we didn't do. Don't hit your wife. That's propriety. Don't beat your children. Because you beating on your child, right? You sustaining internal wounds. Simple as that. You don't recognize, but you are. You know, you grab the whip, you grab the belt, you grab the iron cord, you beat your child. That's impropriety. We don't like to hear that because some of us are perpetrators of it, right? But now we talk about truth. We have to be okay with being dismayed. We have to be okay being made to feel discomfort because of truth. That's the only way you grow, right? You cannot grow through ease. You grow through difficulty.
Right.
All right. So I'll stop there.
Right. Yeah. I tend to be in conversations where people probably won't say it verbatim, but they are really living this life as if they will avoid and skip conflict. It's like they intend not to have any conflict, right? Which seems interesting to me. If you had to give an assessment of our seduction to or for or of this concept of whiteness, this parasitic. You know, I know the brother asked about like, well, just use whatever we can. And you touched on it earlier, but that damage that's done to us, can you speak a little bit about our assessment about our desire to change our proximity to whiteness or just, I don't know, just become white?
One of the things we have to understand about white people is that what they are good at, they are good at manipulation. I often teach this, that, you know, like in each society, you have what is known as virtues. There are things that we just feel like you should have, you should do these things, right? So in the European societies, their virtues are, some of the primary virtues that they tend to applaud in one another are trickery, deceit, manipulation, and treachery. If you go study, you know, one of their greatest political theorists, which is Machiavelli, if you study Machiavelli, that's pretty much what he teaches, you know, and he was in the 15th century. And when you look at white people and look at how they have behaved, this is what they are about. So because they practice those virtues, manipulation, trickery, deceit, and treachery, they are forever using those against us. So they have crafted a narrative, and they have photoshopped an image of themselves to project to the world about their supremacy. And the way they seeks to reinforce that supremacy is by using the might of their system to block all of your advances forward, right? And then make you believe that your inability to move forward is due to your own blackness. They remove themselves out of the equation. And then when you buy into that lie, you see them as being this thing. They have put up all these roadblocks in your way and convince you that the roadblocks don't exist, that you are your own roadblock. At some point, you begin to believe that they are in fact better, they are greater, they are smarter, they are the prettiest, and you begin to aspire for that. Once that takes place, you are lost. You are lost soul at that point because you're neither black nor white.
I appreciate that. So we get into our last question. Make sure that you type any questions that you have in before we finish up. You mentioned obviously we talked about corporal punishment and hitting children, and those are some of the psychological scars to the psyche. But when you think about all the propaganda, the education system, community ideologies, and things myths that have been perpetuated, and our kids will be exposed to that. So how do you redirect or protect them from this like onslaught of anti-African, whatever you want to call it, rhetoric and propaganda?
So that's a great point. So what I like to say is this: like when you talk about culture, there's a number of ways in which you can talk about culture, but I like to talk about it from the perspective understanding culture as an insulator, right? Culture insulates you from the exterior boundaries of anything that's outside of the cultural parameters. So the way you protect your child, first and foremost, you have to rear your child in an environment that reinforces his or her blackness and highlights the Africanity. So you have to control the images that they see. You have to control the people that they see. Now, granted, when you travel throughout this land, you're going to see white people. You're going to see white images and things of that nature. But you still have to be able to debrief, and you have to always tell your children who white people are. You can't postpone that conversation. They have to be known. Your child needs to know who white people are as soon as they are able to process information. In your homes, all of the artwork, all of the pictures, all of everything should be black. If you do watch a movie they got white folk in it, make sure it's a black theme. Make sure black people are in it. Make sure you can translate what's going on. Make sure they have black books. Don't give them toys, white toys. Don't give them action figures that don't hold up blackness. Take those, for our young boys, take them little white wrestling figures out their house. They don't need them little white, wrestling figures and things of that nature, right? So this is how you begin, in a sense, to do it. The most important thing, the mother and the father must be African-centered. They must be clear. The mother and the father must be clear, and they must socialize the children along the lines of blackness. I didn't say educate, because for me, socialization is all that matters. Because the way I socialize my child is going to factor in his or her educational development. So the focus is socialization. How am I socializing you to interact and interface in this world that we live in? What's your socialization? What's your orientation? What is the world view that I want you to have? Right? What is the ideological lens that I want you to look through? That's my principal focus for my child. And me and the mother are, in fact, that which models for the children what we desire for them to become.
Appreciate that. As you wrap up, what I want you to do is give me your final thoughts. I mean, we've went around with concepts of violence, and I went into different points. Could you give us some final words? And while you are doing the final words, just in case we missed anybody on Facebook or YouTube, you can comment your question in, and we'll get those questions answered. But what are your final thoughts and words that you want to say about the topic, and just some of the things we discussed?
Yes. Violence is something that must be discussed, must be thought about, and we must approach violence and deal with violence. We have to be careful not to inadvertently concentrate our thinking of violence solely on Black people, primarily Black boys or Black youth. We have to understand that the behaviors that we see among some of our youth that we define as being violent are behaviors that are being adapted and adopted from a larger society. And lastly, never take what we define as being Black on Black violence out of the context of the United States of America, because Black on Black violence has no true meaning when you truly situate it in the context of America, because the entire American context is violent, right? So when you place it in the American context and you start looking at any group identity, you see that all groups have their run-ins. So what this society want us to magnify as a major problem is only symptomatic of the original problem, which is the American violence against Black people. So what we see as being Black on Black violence is symptomatic of the larger problem. So when we start focusing on the larger problem, we'll see what's really taking place. And that's what I would say. Let's be very careful in our analysis of one another. Be very careful in the language that we use. And every chance that we can move forward, if our scholars or our great thinkers introduce us to new words or new concepts, then we should adopt those concepts. Don't be so stubborn. Don't be like, oh man, I ain't come up with that. That's his. No, we should pick them up and use them, right? This is the only way we're going to combat this thing. We can't always be standoffish. Like everybody should say a BB Fahodier. Baba Baruti gave us a terminology, you know what I'm saying? He popularized it, right? It makes sense. You know what I'm saying? Usually it's our affirmation. A BB Fahodier. It keeps us on point. You know, lets us know African liberation. You know what I'm saying? The same thing. You know, I started first 3 months out. Race first. Simple, it keep you grounded. You know, lets you know who's who. So I think we need to begin to do things like that. Like we need to be thinking in terms of how we can be truly independent in how we think, how we act, how we move, how we process things. We got to work real hard to get our minds back. And lastly, administer to your spirit. If you do not know how to do that, inbox me. You got Sister Sean on here. You got a few people on here that understands that. Just reach out to anybody. Just say, listen, I'm trying to figure out how to get on my spirit. And you don't got to be religious to do that. You know, I'm not trying to proselytize anyone. It don't require religion to administer to your spirit. But we got to start thinking about spirit wellness. Dr. Baba Wade Nobles talks about that a lot. So I'll end right there.
All right. You got any events or any plugs or anything that you got coming up right now or need?
Yes. Well, tomorrow, September the 19th, me and my wife is doing a Power Couple Initiative workshop. And what that essentially is we believe that Black couples, Black relationships should be what we define as being power couples. So we have some outlines, some guidelines, some protocols to what we believe a power couple is. And we have some experience about how to go out creating the power couple. And so that's what this workshop is about. It's going to focus on relationships, you know, some things we feel that can enhance, make it stronger, but most importantly, like what are the key features that would make it a power couple? Because at the end of the day, we need to be in relationship, not just for ourselves, but the reason why we need to be in relationship is to figure out how we in turn can enhance the community that we are part of. So if your relationship isn't doing that, then we're good at the relationship. Because right now it ain't about personal gratification. We can't think it's all about that. That's not why we came together as people. You know, we ain't come together for that's not our principal reason for coming together.
Right.
So that's the only thing. That's the only thing we got coming up right now. That I think that I would like to put out there is the Power Couple Initiative. If anybody interested in being a part of that, you can reach out to me on Facebook, Baba Imhotep.
All right. Is there so they'll catch you on Facebook? Is there a website to go to also, or just catch you on Facebook?
Just on Facebook. That'll be quickest and the easiest.
Okay. All right. Appreciate you, man. So appreciate you and your energy. Our next discussion is on homesteading and living off the land. We got a couple people from I think Detroit and out west. So make sure you're tuned in. Baba, thank you again for coming through, brother.
Thank you. It was my honor. Peace and blessings.